I was standing at the altar in my white dress when a woman burst through the church doors and screamed, "Stop! That's my husband!" The entire congregation froze. My groom Xander just sat there, his face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug. When she told me to check his wallet, what I found behind his ID made my hands shake so violently that my bouquet hit the floor, white roses scattering across the marble like broken promises. But let me back up for a second. My name is Kaya Westbrook, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I was living in a fairy tale. 28 years old, successful marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company, about to marry the man who made every other relationship I'd ever had look like a rough draft. Xander Thorne wasn't just handsome with his dark hair and those green eyes that seemed to see right through to your soul. He was brilliant, charming, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee after one date and sent flowers to your office just because it was Tuesday. The woman standing in the aisle wasn't supposed to be part of my story. Lyric Ashford, she'd said her name was, though she claimed it was actually Lyric Thorne. She was beautiful in a way that made my stomach twist. Long auburn hair, sharp cheekbones, wearing a navy blue dress that looked expensive enough to pay my rent for 3 months. She wasn't some crazy ex-girlfriend making a scene. She stood there with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush while everyone else was still learning to play cards. "This has to be a joke," I said, my voice echoing off the cathedral ceiling. St. Catherine's had never felt so massive, so suffocating. 200 guests stared at us like we were putting on dinner theater, except nobody was laughing. My sister Nola stood beside me, her bridesmaid dress rustling as she stepped forward, ready to fight if necessary. "That's Nola for you, 5'2" of pure protective instinct." "Check his wallet," Lyric repeated, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "Behind his driver's license. Then tell me if you think this is a joke." I looked at Xander, waiting for him to say something, anything, to laugh it off, to have security escort this woman out, to tell me this was some elaborate prank his college buddies had arranged. But he just sat there in his $1,000 tuxedo, staring at his shoes like they held the secrets of the universe. His best man, Colt, had a hand on his shoulder, but even Colt looked confused. All his usual swagger evaporated. "Xander?" My voice cracked on his name. "What's going on? Who is this woman?" My father Damon started to stand from his front row seat, his police officer brother Bryce already moving toward the aisle. My mother Vera grabbed Damon's arm, holding him back, her face pale against her lavender mother-of-the-bride dress. Even my brother Jax, who always had a joke ready, stood silent in his groomsman position, his mouth slightly open like he'd forgotten how to form words. The church felt like it was holding its breath. You could hear the air conditioning humming, someone's baby fussing in the back rows, the rustle of programs as people shifted uncomfortably. My cousin Mika stood with the other bridesmaids, her eyes wide, looking between me and Lyric like she was watching a tennis match nobody wanted to win. "I'm his wife," Lyric said, and those 3 words hit me like physical blows. "We've been married for 4 years. Legal, binding, real." She pulled out her phone, holding it up high enough for people in the front rows to see. "Marriage certificate, dated June 15th, 4 years ago. Xander Matthias Thorne and Lyric Rose Ashford. Las Vegas, if you're wondering. The Little White Chapel." The laugh that came out of me sounded unhinged. "Vegas? You expect me to believe that Xander, who planned our engagement for 6 months and proposed at his family's estate with a 5-carat ring, married you in Vegas?" "I don't expect you to believe anything," Lyric said, taking 3 more steps down the aisle. Her heels clicked against the marble like a countdown. "That's why I'm telling you to check his wallet, behind his driver's license. There's a photo from our wedding day. But that's not even the important part. There's something else back there, something that explains everything, something he should have told you before you ever put on that dress." The way she said it, tired rather than vindictive, made my blood run cold. This wasn't about revenge or jealousy. She looked at me with something almost like pity, and that terrified me more than anger ever could. The morning had started perfectly, the kind of wedding day you see in movies where everything glows with soft light and possibility. I woke up at the Rosewood Hotel at 6:30, not because of an alarm, but because my body knew this was the day I'd been planning for 18 months. The suite was already buzzing with energy when I opened my eyes. Nola had ordered room service for 8 people, the coffee table covered with fruit platters, pastries, and enough champagne to float a small boat. "The bride is awake," Mika announced, already halfway through her second mimosa. "Let the transformation begin." My mother Vera was steaming my dress for the 3rd time, even though the hotel staff had already done it twice. "You can never be too careful with silk," she muttered, running her hands over the bodice, checking for invisible wrinkles only mothers can see. The dress had cost more than my car, a confession I'd only made to Nola, who'd whistled low and said, "Well, you only get married once, right?" The hairstylist arrived at 7, followed by the makeup artist at 7:30. They worked on all of us in assembly line precision. Nola got smoky eyes that made her look like a movie star. Mika chose rose gold shimmer that caught the light when she laughed, which was often. 3 more bridesmaids filled the room with chatter about their own relationships, their dresses, the groomsmen they'd been paired with. "Remember when Xander couldn't figure out how to parallel park at your first date?" Nola said, carefully holding still while the makeup artist worked on her lips. "You texted me saying he was perfect except he drove like a grandmother." "He was nervous," I defended him, smiling at the memory. He admitted later he'd practiced the route to the restaurant 3 times that week. "That should have been your first red flag," Vera said, but she was smiling too. "Men who practice that much are hiding something." "Mom, he wanted to impress me. It was sweet." "Everything Xander does is calculated," she replied, adjusting my robe. "That man doesn't sneeze without planning which direction to turn his head." At the time, I thought she was just being overprotective. Vera had opinions about every man I'd ever dated. Too short, too tall, too ambitious, not ambitious enough. But with Xander, her complaints felt different. Less about his characteristics and more about something she couldn't quite name. My father knocked on the door at 9:15, exactly when I'd told him to arrive. Damon walked in wearing his tuxedo, looking uncomfortable, but proud. "Princess, you look beautiful," he said, then immediately looked away like he might cry. "Xander's already at the church with his groomsmen. Jax texted that they're all accounted for, nobody's making a run for it." "Did you give him the dad talk?" I asked, letting the hairstylist position my veil. "Last night at the rehearsal dinner. Told him if he hurt you, I had a brother on the force and knew how to hide a body." He winked, but something in his expression seemed forced. "He just smiled and said he'd never give me reason to worry." The photographer arrived at 10, snapping what felt like 1,000 photos. Me with my bridesmaids, me with Vera, me with both parents, me looking out the window at the city below, me holding my grandmother's pearl necklace that would be my something old. Every moment documented, preserved, turned into evidence of a perfect morning before a perfect wedding. "Kaya, honey, you keep checking your phone," Vera noticed around 10:30. "Is everything okay?" "Xander hasn't texted since last night. We agreed not to talk on the wedding day until the ceremony, but I thought he might break the rule." "He's probably just respecting your wishes," Nola said, but she grabbed my phone and checked it anyway. "Nothing to worry about. Colt posted a story 15 minutes ago of all the guys at the church. Xander's there, looking nervous as hell, actually. I should have paid attention to that." Xander didn't get nervous. In 2 years together, I'd seen him handle everything from hostile business takeovers to his mother's cancer diagnosis with the same steady calm. But on our wedding day, the one day that should have been certain, he was nervous. The last thing I did before leaving the hotel room was spray my grandmother's perfume on my wrists. White gardenia, a scent that always made me feel protected. I had no idea I was about to walk into a church where protection wouldn't be enough. The ceremony started at exactly noon because Xander insisted odd-numbered times were bad luck for marriages. I stood at the back of St. Catherine's Cathedral, my arm linked through my father's, watching 200 guests turn in their seats as the music began. The church looked like something from a magazine spread with white orchids and baby's breath lining every pew. $10,000 of flowers that would be dead by Monday. Walking down that aisle felt like floating. Each face I passed beamed at me with the kind of joy people save for weddings and newborns. My college roommate dabbing her eyes with tissue, Xander's business partners nodding their approval, my grandmother in the front row clutching her handkerchief. The string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon, which Xander had specifically requested even though I'd wanted something more modern. He stood at the altar looking like every bride's dream in his black Tom Ford tuxedo, his green eyes locked on mine with an intensity that usually made my knees weak. But something was off in his expression. Where I expected to see joy or even tears, I saw something that looked almost like fear. Colt stood beside him, whispering something in his ear, but Xander didn't respond, didn't even blink. Father Morrison began the ceremony with the traditional greeting, his voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Kaya and Xander in holy matrimony." The words washed over me like a familiar song. We'd rehearsed this yesterday, everyone hitting their marks perfectly. Nola adjusted my train, making sure it photographed perfectly. My mother cried quietly in the front row, my father having just placed my hand in Xander's before taking his seat. Xander's hand felt cold, clammy in a way that made me want to ask if he was feeling all right. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Father Morrison continued, "one that should not be entered into lightly, but with certainty, mutual respect, and love." Xander's jaw tightened at the word certainty. A muscle in his cheek twitched, the same tell he had during difficult negotiations. I squeezed his hand, trying to communicate without words that everything was okay, that wedding nerves were normal, that in 10 minutes we'd be married and laughing about this. Therefore, if anyone can show just cause why these two should not be lawfully joined together, let them speak now or forever, hold their peace. The pause that followed usually lasted 3 seconds, just long enough for dramatic effect before moving on. I counted in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, and then the doors exploded open. Not opened, exploded, like someone had kicked them hard enough to slam against the walls. "Stop this wedding!" Every head in the church whipped around. A woman strode down the aisle with the confidence of someone who owned the building. Navy blue dress, designer heels, her auburn hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. She wasn't running or stumbling. She walked with purpose, each step measured and deliberate. "That man is my husband," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. Then chaos erupted. Guests gasped, whispered, stood up for a better view. Someone dropped a hymnal that hit the floor with a bang. My Uncle Bryce, the cop, moved into the aisle like he was ready to arrest someone. "Excuse me," I heard myself say, though it didn't sound like my voice. Too high, too thin. The woman stopped 10 feet from the altar. "My name is Lyric Ashford. Lyric Thorne, actually. I married that man 4 years ago." She pointed at Xander like she was identifying him in a lineup. "This is insane," Nola said beside me. "Xander, call security." "Get this crazy person out of here." But Xander didn't move, didn't speak. He stared at Lyric like she was a ghost materializing from his past, which, I would soon learn, wasn't far from the truth. "Check his wallet," Lyric said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. They weren't angry or vindictive. They looked tired, like someone at the end of a very long journey. "Behind his driver's license. Everything you need to know is there." My hands moved without my permission, reaching for Xander's jacket pocket. He didn't stop me, didn't even flinch when I pulled out his leather wallet, the one I'd bought him for his birthday with his initials embossed in gold. The church had gone so quiet I could hear the leather creak as I opened it. Behind his driver's license, exactly where Lyric said it would be, was a folded photograph. My fingers trembled as I pulled it out, the paper soft from being handled multiple times. The image that unfolded made my stomach drop through the floor. Xander in a tuxedo. Not the one he wore now, but something cheaper, standing next to Lyric in a simple white dress. They were kissing outside what looked like a Vegas chapel, complete with neon signs and Elvis visible in the background. "Keep looking," Lyric said softly. "There's more." Behind the photo was a medical card, the kind people with severe allergies carry. But this wasn't about allergies. The text swam before my eyes, but I forced myself to read it out loud. Patient, Xander Thorne. Condition, dissociative identity disorder. Emergency contact, Dr. Silas Raven, Psychiatric Institute. Below that, in smaller text, Patient presence with multiple distinct personality states. If found confused or disoriented, contact immediately. What is this? I looked up at Xander, the wallet shaking in my hands. What does this mean? Xander's entire posture changed. His shoulders rolled forward, his stance widened, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Not just emotional, but actually different, like someone else was using his vocal cords. Kaya, I'm not Xander. My name is Zane. Xander doesn't know about the wedding. He doesn't know about any of this. The bouquet slipped from my other hand, hitting the marble with a soft thud. White roses scattered around my feet like snow. Nola grabbed my arm, whether to steady me or herself. I couldn't tell. This is sick, my brother Jack said from his groomsman position. This is really sick. I can explain. The man who looked like Xander but called himself Zane said, taking a step toward me. I love you. That's real. What we have is real. Don't touch her, my father commanded, moving between us. But I pushed past him. I needed to understand what was happening, needed to make sense of why the man I was about to marry was claiming to be someone else. Lyric stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble. 4 years ago, I married someone named Zeke. Same face, same body, different person entirely. It took me 2 years to figure out what was wrong, why my husband would disappear for days and come back with no memory of leaving. The doctor, I said, pulling out my phone with numb fingers. We're calling this Doctor Raven right now. Already on it, Jack said, his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, this is an emergency. We have a patient of Dr. Silas Raven who appears to be having an episode at St. Catherine's Cathedral. The guests were in chaos now. Some were leaving, others pressing closer to hear. Father Morrison stood frozen at the altar, his book of ceremonies hanging uselessly in his hands. Xander's parents, who I'd just noticed in the second row, sat rigid as statues. His mother's face had gone gray. Did you know? I spun toward them. Atlas, Indigo, did you know your son was sick? Atlas Thorne, powerful CEO of Thorne Industries, looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. We suspected something after Finn died, but Xander seemed to recover. He was successful, normal. We thought he'd processed the trauma. Finn? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. My youngest son, Indigo whispered. He died in a house fire when he was 8. Xander was 16. He was supposed to be watching him. The man who called himself Zane made a sound like he'd been punched. Don't talk about Finn. Xander can't handle it when you talk about Finn. That's when I realized the full horror of it. The man I loved, the one who'd proposed to me on a moonlit beach, who knew my coffee order and my favorite song and the spot on my neck that made me shiver, he was just a fragment, a piece of someone's broken mind trying to forget a dead brother. How many are there? I asked Lyric. How many versions of him exist? 3 that I knew of, she said. But looking at you in that dress, I'm guessing you met a 4th. Dr. Silas Raven arrived 20 minutes later, though it felt like hours. He walked into the church vestry where we'd gathered, a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes that had probably seen too much. The main sanctuary had been cleared, only immediate family remaining. My parents, Nola, Jack's, Xander's parents, and Lyric, who sat in the corner like she'd been through this before. I need everyone to stay calm, Doctor, Raven said, setting down his medical bag. Xander is in a dissociative state right now. Any aggressive confrontation could cause rapid switching between identities. Switching? Vera asked, gripping my father's hand. Think of it like changing channels on a television, Dr. Raven explained, his voice steady and professional. Each identity has its own memories, its own relationships, its own sense of self. They're not aware of each other, at least not fully. He turned to the man I'd almost married. Can you tell me your name? Zane. My name is Zane. I met Kaya 2 years ago at an investment launch. We've been together ever since. And what do you know about Xander? He's the one who works, the businessman. He handles the company, the deals, the board meetings. I handle the life outside of that. Dr. Raven made notes on his tablet. And Zeke? I don't know any Zeke. Lyric laughed bitterly from her corner. Of course you don't. Zeke doesn't know about you either. He thinks I'm crazy when I tell him he disappears for weeks at a time. The doctor continued his examination, asking questions that revealed the horrifying complexity of what we were dealing with. Each identity had emerged at different times, for different reasons. Xander was the original, the achievement-focused businessman who buried his trauma in work. Zeke emerged first about 5 years ago, during a particularly stressful merger that coincided with the anniversary of Finn's death. He was spontaneous, reckless, the kind of person who'd get married in Vegas. Zane appeared 2 years ago, the romantic, the one who could feel emotions Xander had locked away. The human mind is remarkably adaptive, Dr. Raven explained. When trauma becomes unbearable, it can fracture, creating separate containers for different aspects of pain and memory. So nothing about our relationship was real? I asked, my voice hollow. That's not true, Zane said urgently. My feelings for you are real. Every moment we shared, every conversation, every kiss, it was all real. But you're not real. The words exploded out of me. You're just a piece of someone else, a fragment that shouldn't exist. That's when it happened. His face contorted, his body jerked, and suddenly he was different again. The posture straightened, the expression hardened. What's going on? Why are we in the church vestry? This was Xander's voice, the one I'd heard in business calls, confident and controlled. Kaya, why are you in your wedding dress? The ceremony isn't until noon. It's 12:45, Jack said quietly. Xander checked his watch, confusion crossing his features. That's impossible. I was just at breakfast with the groomsmen. Before anyone could respond, another switch. His body relaxed, his smile turned cocky. Lyric, baby, what are you doing here? This must be Zeke. I told you I had a business trip this weekend. We're getting divorced, Lyric said flatly. I can't do this anymore. The switching accelerated, triggered by stress. In the span of 5 minutes, I watched 3 different people inhabit the same body. Each switch was preceded by a brief moment of blankness, like someone had hit reset on a computer. Xander demanding to know why everyone was staring. Zane reaching for my hand, Zeke asking Lyric why she was crying. Then something new happened. His body went completely rigid, his eyes rolled back, and when they refocused, they looked different, younger somehow, terrified. Where's Finn? The voice was high, childlike. I can't find Finn. The smoke is everywhere. I can't find my brother. Indigo let out a sob. Atlas stood frozen. Dr. Raven moved quickly, speaking in soothing tones, but I barely heard him. I was watching a 30-year-old man become a terrified 16-year-old boy, still trapped in a burning house, still looking for a brother who'd been dead for 14 years. 6 months have passed since my wedding that wasn't. I'm sitting in my new apartment, the one I got after leaving the place Xander and I had shared. Zane, Xander. I still don't know what to call him. The man I loved was apparently 3 different people, possibly 4, and none of them were entirely real. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Dr. Raven had Xander admitted to his psychiatric facility that same day. The wedding vendors still got paid because the food was already cooked, the flowers already arranged, the band already set up. My parents lost $40,000, but Dad said it was better than losing me to a marriage built on fractured reality. Lyric and I met for coffee a month after everything fell apart. Strange to have coffee with your almost husband's actual wife, but we were the only 2 people who understood what it felt like to love someone who didn't fully exist. The hardest part, she told me, stirring her latte, was that Zeke genuinely loved me. In his reality, we were happily married. He'd bring me flowers, plan romantic dinners, talk about having kids. Then he'd disappear, and Xander would surface, having no idea who I was. How long did you try to make it work? 2 years after I found out. I thought love would be enough. I thought if I just tried harder, understood more, gave him more support, somehow he'd integrate and become whole. She laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. You can't love someone into being a complete person? Trust me, I tried. She filed for divorce the week after the wedding incident, moved to Portland, started over. She sends me occasional texts, usually just thinking of you or hope you're healing. We're trauma bonded in the strangest way, sisters in a grief that nobody else understands. I've been visiting Xander at the facility, not as his fiancée, not as his girlfriend, just as someone who cares about his recovery. Dr. Raven says the integration therapy is working, slowly. The different identities are becoming aware of each other, sharing memories, learning to coexist before hopefully merging. Last week, a fourth identity surfaced during therapy. Ziggy, a 10-year-old boy, the age Xander was when he first started showing signs of fracturing. Ziggy collects baseball cards and asks about Finn constantly. It's heartbreaking to watch a grown man's body house a child's terror. "Do you regret it?" Nola asked me yesterday. "Not doing a background check? Not seeing the signs?" The truth is, there were signs. The way he'd sometimes forget conversations we'd had, the different handwriting in birthday cards versus grocery lists, how his taste in music would shift dramatically, the way he'd occasionally call me by the wrong name, then laugh it off as being distracted by work. I'd explained it all away because when you're in love, you become an expert at excusing the inexcusable. "I regret not knowing him," I finally answered. "All of him. The broken parts, the scared parts, the parts that we're trying so hard to forget. I fell in love with 1/3 of a person and thought it was everything." Xander's parents, Atlas and Indigo, paid for his treatment in full. They visit weekly, finally facing the son they lost when Finn died in that fire. Watching someone else grieve for the same person you're grieving but for different reasons is surreal. They lost their whole son. I lost a piece of him I thought was whole. Today, Dr. Raven called with news. Xander is making progress. The identities are starting to merge. He remembers meeting me, proposing to me, marrying Lyric, all of it. The memories are integrating, becoming one narrative instead of 3 separate stories. "He asked about you, Doctor," Raven said. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to see him, the real him, or as close to real as he can get right now." I haven't answered yet. How do you face someone who was everything and nothing all at once? How do you look at a person whose love was real but whose existence was fiction? My therapist says healing isn't linear. Some days I'm angry at Xander for not getting help sooner. Other days I'm angry at Zane for making me fall in love with an illusion. Most days I'm just sad for all of us, caught in the aftermath of a tragedy that happened when Xander was just a 16-year-old boy who couldn't save his brother. Tomorrow I'll decide whether to see him. Tonight, I'm just trying to remember that sometimes the most profound love stories aren't the ones that end with happily ever after. Sometimes they're the ones that teach us how much pain the human heart can transform into different versions of survival. Sometimes love isn't enough to save someone, but compassion might be enough to help them save themselves. If you found this story touching or it resonated with your own experiences of complicated love, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below about what you think Kaya should do, whether she should see Xander again or walk away completely. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories that remind us how complex and resilient the human heart can be. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for understanding that not all broken things can be fixed with love alone.